I knew something was off the second my key jammed in the front door. I jiggled it left, right, even tried the backup, nothing. It wasn't frozen and the weather wasn't cold. Then I caught a whiff of that sharp chemical smell. Glue. Someone had jammed super glue into my front door lock. I backed up and stared at the house I'd lived in for 5 years. My name's Kellan Archer, a construction inspector by trade, and I'm not the kind of guy who backs down from bullies. Especially not ones who hide behind HOA letterheads and fake authority. "Hey, Kellan," came that shrill voice I'd come to loathe. "Having trouble with your door?" I turned slowly. There she was, Harriet Sutton, board president of the Oak Ridge Pines HOA, standing at the edge of her perfectly trimmed lawn, arms crossed like a vulture waiting for a meal to stop twitching. "Someone glued my lock shut," I said, keeping my voice level. Harriet gave a fake gasp. "Oh no, vandalism is such a shame here. Maybe it's a sign, though. You've had that unapproved shed for weeks now. The board voted unanimously to proceed with enforcement. You were warned." "Enforcement? That's not eviction, Harriet. You can fine me, not sabotage my house." She smiled like she'd just won a bake-off. "Well, the board has certain powers when it comes to non-compliant homeowners." I walked back to my truck before I said something I'd regret, but I wasn't letting this slide. 3 weeks earlier, I'd added a small tool shed in my backyard, nothing outrageous. It was within county codes, but apparently not within the visual harmony rules of the HOA. Harriet had shown up the same day, clipboard in hand, demanding I take it down. I told her I'd consider it. Apparently that wasn't the answer she wanted. Over the next week, I got stacked with daily fines. Most of them made up violations: non-compliant lawn edge, unauthorized paint hue. I appealed. The board ignored it. Harriet wanted me gone, and she was speeding up the process however she could. But gluing my lock, that was criminal. I called the sheriff's department. The deputy stared at the lock, took photos, filed a report. He said without seeing someone do it, there wasn't much they could do yet. But I knew Harriet was behind it. She practically confessed in that smug little performance. I wasn't about to let them win. That night, I stayed with my buddy down the road. Next morning, I rolled up with a truckload of steel, reinforced doors, top-grade, commercial-rated deadbolt systems. I tore out every door in my house and replaced them with steel slabs that could stop a battering ram. Harriet wanted a war. She just got one. Later that evening, I caught her pacing in front of my house, phone in hand, jaw clenched. I opened the new door just enough to step out. "Problem?" I asked. "You can't do this. These doors are not in compliance with HOA aesthetics. They're legal up to code, and I'm filing a restraining order." She sputtered. "You're escalating this unnecessarily." "No, Harriet, gluing someone's lock is escalation. This is defense." I went back inside and locked all 3 deadbolts. 2 days later, I came home from work to find my back door kicked open. The frame bent. My entry camera showed Harriet and 2 board members letting themselves in with a crowbar and gloves. I had them in full HD breaking and entering right into my kitchen, so I did what I do best. I documented, compiled, and called my lawyer. This wasn't over. It was just getting good. The morning after the break-in, I stood in my kitchen, coffee in hand, watching the footage again. The camera outside the back entrance had picked up every detail: the time Harriet and 2 other board members slipped around the corner, the way they passed tools between them, even the moment one of them hesitated before jamming the crowbar into the frame. They didn't speak, not even once. They knew better. I transferred the footage onto 3 thumb drives, one for my lawyer, one for the sheriff's department, and one for the county prosecutor's office. Every move I made after that was by the book. I wasn't going to give them even a sliver of ground to stand on. By noon, I was seated in my lawyer's office, a no-nonsense former state prosecutor named Lydia Tran. She didn't ask me unnecessary questions, just watched the video once and leaned back in her chair. "Do you have any written warnings from the HOA giving them permission to enter your home?" she asked. "No, they've only sent fine notices. Nothing about entering the property. I never gave consent." "Good, because what they did here qualifies as criminal trespass and burglary under state law. And since they damaged your home to get in, we've got destruction of property on top of it. That's 3 felonies." She pushed a legal pad toward me. "Write down everything you've seen them do, every interaction, every suspicious incident." I want names, times, dates, and specifics. I didn't stop writing for the next 20 minutes. By the end of the week, the sheriff's office had issued summonses for Harriet, and the two board members caught on camera. The story spread fast. Word got around Oak Ridge Pines like wildfire, neighbors whispering on sidewalks, peeking through blinds, wondering what kind of storm was brewing between Harriet Sutton and the man in the corner house with the steel doors. I didn't say a thing. I didn't have to. The charges spoke loud enough. Still, I wasn't naive. People like Harriet didn't back off with an apology and a court date. They doubled down. Late Friday afternoon, a code enforcement officer knocked on my door. He had a clipboard and a tight smile that didn't match his tired eyes. "You're Kellan Archer?" he asked. "Yeah." "You hear about the break-in?" He shook his head. "No, sir. I'm here about a complaint filed by the Oak Ridge Pines HOA. They've reported you for constructing a non-permitted structure on your property." "Let me guess, the shed," he nodded. "They're claiming it exceeds allowable dimensions under Municipal Code 4.18.3. "Except it doesn't," I said, stepping into the garage. I pulled a folder from the shelf, copies of county permits, measurements, and zoning compliance letters. I handed them over. The man flipped through the documents, eyebrows rising slightly. "Looks like everything's in order here. I'll close the file." Before he left, I asked him one more thing. "Do you know if the HOA's filed complaints like this against anyone else recently?" He hesitated. "Off the record." "They've filed nearly a dozen in the last 2 months, all rejected." I thanked him and closed the door. That gave me exactly what I needed. Saturday morning, I printed flyers, nothing flashy, just facts. I listed the charges against the board members, the rejected complaints, and a copy of the county's confirmation that my shed was legal. At the bottom, I wrote in bold, "Is this who you want representing you?" I walked the neighborhood and delivered one to every mailbox. No speeches, no arguments. Just information. By Sunday, a group of residents had gathered on my lawn. Some were cautious, some angry, most just confused. A woman in her 40s stepped forward. "Is it true they broke into your house?" I nodded. "I have the footage." "They're being prosecuted." "My son saw them that night," another man said. "He was walking his dog, said he thought they were burglars." "They were," I said. "They just happened to wear HOA name tags." That night I got a call from Lydia. "We've got a hearing scheduled next week." The DA's office is pursuing charges, and the judge signed off on a temporary restraining order against all 3 board members. "They can't come within 100 feet of your home." "Good," I said, "because I think they're about to get a lot more visitors." By Monday, the neighborhood was buzzing. Someone had called a special meeting of the HOA. It wasn't Harriet. This one was organized by a group of homeowners invoking a clause in the bylaws, the one that allowed residents to call for a board vote out with signatures from 30% of the community. They had 50. The meeting was set for Saturday. It would be held in the community center, and according to the bylaws, all homeowners had the right to attend, including me. The day before the meeting, I was visited by a man I hadn't seen before. Tall, in his 60s, steel gray hair, and a suit that looked like it belonged in a courtroom. "You Kellan?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm Gerald Langston. I used to serve on the Oak Ridge Pines board before Sutton took over. I resigned after her 2nd year, thought she was power-hungry and reckless." Seems I was right. "What do you want to help?" he said. "I've got records, meeting minutes, financial reports, and internal emails, things that might interest you." He handed me a folder. Inside were pages of flagged expenses, unapproved contracts, and a maintenance fund that had mysteriously lost over $70,000 in 2 years. "You willing to testify?" I asked. "Already filed a statement with the county attorney." When I showed Lydia the documents, she barely blinked. "This is more than enough for a civil suit. If we can prove HOA funds were misused, you've got grounds for damages. And if they retaliated with false code complaints, that's abuse of authority." Saturday arrived like a storm cloud. The community center filled up fast, more than 80 homeowners packed into folding chairs, murmuring and passing whispers as Harriet and her 2 remaining supporters sat stiffly at the front table, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he regretted taking the job. I waited until the motion to remove the board was read aloud. Then I stood. I'd like to present evidence of criminal misconduct by board members currently under indictment, I said. The room fell silent as Lydia stepped forward and connected her laptop to the projector. She played the break-in footage. Then she showed the rejected city code complaints. Then she displayed the financial documents Gerald had provided. By the time she was done, even the lawyer sitting next to Harriet had inched his chair away. The vote was unanimous. Harriet and her allies were removed from the board. As the new board was being chosen made up of residents who had never previously run for anything, someone asked me if I wanted a seat. I declined. I'm not here to rule over anyone, I said. Just wanted my rights back. I walked home under a sky that finally felt wide open again. The steel doors gleamed in the late evening sun, ugly, maybe, but standing strong, just like I planned. The week after the vote felt like waking up in someone else's house, familiar walls, but everything quieter, steadier. No more HOA notices taped to my door. No more staged walks by Harriet, clipboard in hand, pretending to inspect imaginary violations. The silence was nice. Too nice. I'd learned to be wary of quiet moments. That's when the real damage gets stitched together. Lydia called me on a Wednesday evening. So, she began, turns out the break-in wasn't the only line the board crossed. I leaned against the kitchen counter and waited. You remember that maintenance fund we found the missing 70 grand in? She asked. Yeah. I had a forensic accountant go through all of it. There's a pattern: monthly withdrawals and amounts just below the audit trigger threshold. Always routed through a landscaping subcontractor named Clearway Services. Never seen them work here. They never did, she said. The company is real, but it's owned by a shell corporation in Nevada. We traced the payments back to a personal checking account belonging to none other than Harriet's nephew. He lives out in Reno. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at the wall, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something less absurd. She was embezzling, Lydia said, confirming what I already knew. For over 2 years. Does the DA have this? We sent the full report this morning. They're opening a fraud investigation. The next day, I saw the first unmarked cruiser roll through the neighborhood. 2 detectives walked into the community center now under interim management and came out with 3 boxes of records. Harriet's name was no longer being whispered. It was being spoken loudly, with a mix of disbelief and rage. That evening, I answered my door to find a man shifting on his feet, holding a small stack of papers. You don't know me, he said. Name's Carter Voss. My dad lived here before he passed. I've been handling his estate. I nodded for him to continue. He got fined every month for 2 years. Harriet said his backyard was non-compliant with visual standards. He had dementia, barely left the house. I think they were harassing him, trying to force him to sell. Did he? No, he died in that house. Hospice care alone. He used to talk about how the HOA made him feel like a criminal. I stepped onto the porch and looked him in the eye. You want in on the civil suit, he nodded. I've got every letter, every fine, every time they threatened Lee in action. If there's a record of this happening to anyone else, I want to find it. Carter wasn't the only one. By the end of the week, Lydia had compiled claims from 14 other homeowners. Seniors, single parents, veterans, each one had been targeted with a pattern. Repeated fines, vague citations, and increasing pressure to sell. In 4 cases, the homes had been sold under duress, often to LLCs connected to a single real estate brokerage. Lydia took that list to the state attorney general's office. 3 days later, subpoenas were issued for every real estate transaction involving HOA board action over the past 3 years. The brokerage's license was suspended pending investigation. And Harriet. She was arrested at her daughter's house while trying to shred documents in the garage. I heard about it from a neighbor who lived 2 doors down. She tried to blame it all on the treasurer, she said. Said she just signed what was put in front of her. I shook my head. She forged 3 signatures on a lien notice. I saw the handwriting analysis myself. The neighbor looked away. I voted for her, twice. Most people did, I said. That's how she got this far. The civil suit was gaining momentum. Lydia filed for damages on behalf of every homeowner who documented financial loss, including me. Between property damage, legal fees, and stress-related medical claims, the total was pushing close to $300,000. We didn't stop there. The new board elected in an emergency session voted unanimously to open HOA books to a full independent audit. What came out was worse than we'd expected. Harriet and her allies had used association funds to pay for private travel, meals at high-end restaurants, and even a weekend retreat at a spa resort upstate. All under vague descriptions like leadership development and conflict resolution training. The auditors flagged every transaction. The new board handed it all to the state comptroller's office. That's when the IRS got involved. Apparently, Harriet had failed to report the embezzled funds as income. And since she'd used a false business to route them, it crossed into federal tax fraud. Meanwhile, I stayed out of the spotlight. I didn't give interviews. I didn't make speeches. I just kept showing up to the hearings, the depositions, the meetings. I let the paper trail do what fists never could. One afternoon, Lydia and I met at the courthouse cafe. Something in her expression told me she wasn't just there to update me on the case. "There's going to be a settlement offer," she said. "From the HOA's insurance carrier. How much? They're offering full reimbursement to every plaintiff plus an additional payout for punitive damages. You'd clear around $90,000 after fees." I leaned back, processing it. "But there's a catch," she added. "You'd have to drop your individual suit against Harriet. No public testimony, no trial, of course. They wanted it buried." "Is she facing jail time?" Lydia nodded. "Yes, the fraud charges alone are enough for a sentence. Add tax evasion and abuse of fiduciary duty, and it's not just fines. She'll serve." I sat with it for a minute. "Then I'll take the settlement, but I want something in writing. I want it public that she was removed for criminal misconduct. No vague phrasing. No resigned for personal reasons nonsense." "I can make that happen," Lydia said. The next week, the settlement was finalized, funds were distributed, public records were updated. Harriet's name was scrubbed from every HOA document, but only after a line was added to the meeting minutes of her removal. Terminated for cause following confirmation of criminal misconduct, resulting in financial harm to members of the Oak Ridge Pines community. The neighborhood didn't go back to normal. It built something better. The new board installed transparent budgeting software. Every homeowner could log in and see where dues were going. A new bylaw was passed requiring a 2/3 vote before any fine could be levied against a resident. And a community watch group not affiliated with the board was formed to keep an eye on activity, both inside and outside the neighborhood. People waved again, not the fake kind. Real waves. Small talk on driveways became normal again. Kids played in the street without someone threatening to fine their parents for noise violations. One morning, I stepped outside to find Carter planting a tree in the small median between our homes. "Red maple," he said. "Dad always wanted one." I helped him dig the last few feet. We didn't talk much, just worked. When we were done, I looked at the young tree, still thin and shaky in the wind. "Think it'll make it?" I asked. "Yeah," Carter said. "It will now." I walked back to my steel door, still bolted and solid, and for the first time in months I left it open while I sat on the porch. No clipboard warriors, no threats. Just the wind, the sound of branches, and the quiet hum of a neighborhood that had finally figured out how to stand up for itself. It was late fall when the last of the lawsuits wrapped up. Leaves fell in wet bundles. The air had that dry, metallic edge, and the streets of Oak Ridge Pines were finally quiet in a way they hadn't been in years. But quiet didn't mean forgotten, not when people were still sorting through the damage Harriet and her board had caused. Carter and I were walking the perimeter of a few homes near the south side of the neighborhood. Some of the older residents had asked us to check their fences after last week's storm. We weren't contractors, just neighbors with tool belts and time. The kind of thing people used to do for one another before the HOA turned solidarity into suspicion. "You see this?" Carter crouched by the corner of an old irrigation box. "Wiring's been cut clean." "Probably months ago. Could have been when they were trying to fake non-compliant landscaping violations," I said, kneeling beside him. "No working irrigation plants die. Easy citation." He nodded, jaw tight. They were playing chess with people's lives. We repaired the box, secured the lines, and moved on. But that discovery lit a fuse. Lydia called again 2 days later. Her tone wasn't her usual razor-sharp calm, it was urgent, clipped. "Have you ever heard of a company called Resolute Enforcement Services?" "No, should I have?" They were contracted by the HOA under Harriet's board, private security firm technically, but I pulled their filings. "They're not licensed in this state." "Wait, are you saying they were operating illegally?" "Worse," she said. "They weren't just unlicensed. They were created 6 months before the HOA hired them, and they listed a P.O. box in another county. No real office, no real staff. Just a single listed officer, Daniel Kessler, her brother-in-law," I said immediately. "Exactly. But here's where it gets ugly. I've got 5 reports from residents claiming they were threatened by individuals claiming to be from Resolute Enforcement. One woman said a man came to her door with a clipboard and told her she'd be locked out if she didn't pay her outstanding balance." I was already pacing. "They tried to do that to me. Glued my lock, remember? Right. But that's not all. I filed a request with the state licensing board. Turns out that same company was flagged last year for impersonating municipal code officers in another district. They were scamming people, using fake authority to scare homeowners into paying bogus fines, and possibly extorting the elderly," she said. "I've already contacted the state attorney general's office. They're opening a criminal investigation into fraudulent security operations and impersonation of public officials." That night, I met with Gerald Langston, the former board member who'd helped us crack the financial records. He'd kept copies of all HOA contracts from the last 5 years, including the one with Resolute Enforcement Services. We laid them out on his dining table, highlighted terms, cross-referenced signatures. "Look at this," he pointed to the clause labeled Enforcement and Compliance Authority. "This gives Resolute the right to access properties for inspection. That's how they got away with entering homes. But they weren't licensed to enforce anything." "Exactly. And this clause," he tapped another section, "it was added after the contract was signed. Forgery. And if Harriet approved this without a resident vote," he said, "she breached governance bylaws. We handed everything over to Lydia. She forwarded it to the AG's office, who then involved the State Fraud Task Force. A week later, Oak Ridge Pines found itself at the center of a statewide scandal. News vans lined the front entrance by Thursday. Reporters stood outside the community center, where law enforcement had set up temporary offices to process records and interview residents. A task force officer confirmed that the HOA had violated multiple state statutes, including impersonation of code authorities, unlawful entry, fraudulent contracting, and misuse of association funds. At the heart of it all was a web of shell companies, false invoices, and threats disguised as policy enforcement. And the worst part, it had been going on for years. One morning, I spotted a familiar car parked across from my house. Lydia stepped out and waved me over. She handed me a sealed envelope. "That's from the state's restitution fund. You're being awarded compensation for damages related to unlawful entry, harassment, and property sabotage." I opened the envelope. Inside was a formal letter and a check. I didn't look at the amount, not yet. I just glanced at Lydia. "How many others are getting this?" "Everyone named in the investigation. The state's covering it through the civil penalties recovered from the HOA's insurance bond." The audit showed over $250,000 in fraudulent expenses. I folded the envelope and slid it into my back pocket. "What happens to the board members?" I asked. "Harriet's facing 12 felony counts, including conspiracy, wire fraud, and impersonation of a public official. Her arraignment's next week. And the fake security company, dissolved. Kessler was arrested this morning." I let out a long breath. "Feels like we're finally digging the rot out," she nodded. "It's not just this neighborhood, Kellan. HOAs across the state are being audited now. Yours was just the first to fight back loud enough." That night, I walked the streets for the first time without checking over my shoulder. Porch lights flickered on like stars. Kids played tag between driveways. Something real had returned, something that used to live here before committees and citations took over. At the next community meeting, the new board proposed a motion to dismantle the fine system entirely. In its place, they suggested a voluntary upkeep council, neighbors helping neighbors, no punishments, no threats. Just shared standards voted on by actual residents. The motion passed unanimously. Afterward, I was approached by a woman I hadn't formally met before. She was in her 60s, wore carpenter jeans and a navy pullover, and had the kind of face that looked like it had seen too much and still kept going. "You're the one with the steel doors, right?" "That's me. My name's Luan. I used to live in a different HOA. Left after they tried to charge me for parking my own trailer in my driveway. You gave people here a spine," I smiled. "Wasn't just me. No, but you lit the fuse, and we're all breathing a little easier because of it." In the weeks that followed, the story faded from the state news cycle. The trials moved slowly, as they always do. But the wheels were turning. Harriet's defense team couldn't explain away surveillance footage, forged contracts, or the paper trail leading to the fake enforcement company. It was only a matter of time. One Saturday morning, I drove to a salvage yard outside town. I wasn't there for tools or parts. I brought the steel door I'd removed from the back of my house, the one they'd kicked in. It had been sitting in my shed for months, dented, scraped, still bearing the pry marks from that night. I found a welder named Pete, gave him a drawing, and said I'd be back in a week. When I returned, he handed me a finished piece, the steel door reshaped and mounted as a bench. The dents were still there, but now they were polished smooth, sealed under clear coat. I installed it in the community garden, facing west. A small plaque at the base read, "Resilience built here. People sit there now. They talk, they rest, they drink coffee from thermoses and watch the sunset. Some know what the bench used to be, some don't. But the ones who do always smile when they see it, because it's not just a bench. It's a reminder that power, no matter how petty or corrupt, only lasts as long as people stay quiet. And in Oak Ridge Pines, we found our voices.